July 29th, 2025. Well, I want to kind of get into the developments on the world scene here. Of course, as I'm recording this, the big news, of course, is the mass shooting in New York City. And I don't say too much about that. I have a few ideas, but the thing is so much of a developing story that trying to get into that at this point would probably not be that prudent. So I'll just kind of go on to what we're the bigger picture things. And of course, the thing that is, of course, President Trump is in the UK, and I was checking out his golf course over there, which I've been there in a while, and meeting with the British Prime Minister and so forth. And they've completed a trade deal with the EU, basically a 15% tariff on products from Europe. So your BMW and your Mercedes and Porsches are going to cost a little bit more if you're in the mood to buy those kind of things. A little bit above my level at this point, but nonetheless, in terms of money, but whatever. But that's I guess that is wrap it up. So the big thing left, I guess, on all this is the Chinese deal, which is being negotiated in Stockholm as I'm recording this, and we'll see where that goes to. I'm suspecting that one may have the most trouble of all because of some things that have occurred. And that's kind of what I'm getting into here. Of course, I'm getting back to some of my favorite subjects. But I think I'm hitting the things that are kind of really important in a lot of ways. Okay, so the issue that with the Chinese, I think, is right now they're under a 30% tariff. And of course, they have agreed to restore sending the rare earth materials, minerals, and so forth to the United States. And so things are moving along after the trade disruption occurred earlier when they first started announcing tariffs, and they retaliated, and then we retaliated, and they retaliated, and it got to the level you're well over 100%. And at that level, I think trade pretty well bogs down. I'm amazed we're doing that good at 30%, really, but we'll see. And I guess that depends on a lot of things, as how much profit they're making off of what they've been selling us. But the big thing that then developed is he's now announced he's moving up his deadline on the secondary tariffs on Russia. Well, actually, it's not on Russia. It's really on those who trade with Russia, particularly in certain areas, particularly oil. And there's some other items I think on the list too. But the big one is oil. Okay, and so. And I've been kind of looking into that issue a little bit here. So, and I think that complicates getting a deal with the Chinese, because the Chinese are kind of somewhat in league with what the Russians are doing. If nothing else, they're probably quite happy that a lot of the weapon systems that the United States has been shipped over to Ukraine and then destroyed in combat with the Russians, which has cost the Chinese nothing, but it's weakening our overall posture in some ways. So that's a factor to consider in all this. So that's one thing. So what the real question is, will the Chinese cave to our ultimatum, basically? Now, I've done a little bit of looking into the subject about that question. So, and the first thing I was thinking was, well, let's just do a little Google search with now it has an AI function, and to say, well, if the Chinese are, likely to cave on this, then they probably are making inquiries and doing negotiations for alternate sources of oil already, so they won't be, left without supply, so to speak. And what I was able to find is there's no evidence at this point that the Chinese are doing that. Now, then I asked about India, thinking, well, that's another possibility. And India, it looked like they said India is trying to diversify their supplies, and it kind of indicates, like I said earlier, that India is the one that's likely to cave, I think, pretty clearly. And then I thought, well, what about Turkey? And they said that Turkey is kind of a mixed bag. They're less definition of all on that one. Like, they're not clearly looking for anything else, but who knows what they'll do. The other thing I know about Turkey is they're getting their oil supply, they get through a pipeline, where the others are getting it by ship, which are more obvious. I mean, I guess we can obviously tell whether they're getting it through the pipeline by looking at financial transactions and and whether or not alternate supplies are being sought or not when it happens. And then there are other smaller customers of the Russian oil, so that's interesting. And then Brazil and that, by the way, this is all except for Turkey is all pretty much a BRICS issue, and of course Brazil. Their real issue isn't that. I think they actually buy more from the U.S. than we buy from them. I guess we buy coffee and so forth, but coffee beans or whatever. But their whole issue is the Bolsonaro legal case that they're trying to try Bolsonaro for essentially the same kind of thing that the Democrats were really kind of going after Trump for, although they never made it specifically that exactly. But well, I guess they kind of did in the Washington case. And that is the idea he was trying to overthrow the election. And of course, they have a very hostile Supreme Court down there that doesn't like Bolsonaro. And so it looks like, and Trump, of course, is threatening them with 50% tariffs if they. And so far I'm not sure. I think they buying oil from Russia, and I don't know, but I don't think it's a big amount really. They probably could get it from other places, maybe Venezuela. So anyway, so that's the kind of situation on that. So we'll have to see what develops. But I think that may be the hang-up with the Chinese. Maybe a minor thing is this whole TikTok thing, but which was a propaganda front that I think they were using to subvert our youth. But a lot of whatever. So, since Trump's hoping to get more younger voters, at least did in the last election, than normally is the case, I guess going after TikTok is not necessarily a good move. If you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Or you can also follow me on Rumble if you're subscribed there. The address is in the description below. So yeah, that's kind of where we're looking at on this situation. And I think I'm kind of waiting to see what happens now. The Russians, on the other hand, and what might also be moving us, one may be a pressure tactic on the Chinese negotiations, perhaps, and maybe just the fact it's kind of involved in it, maybe, at least behind the scenes. But the other, of course, is the fact that Russians are continuing to advance, and they're moving on Port Ross fairly aggressively. I mean, the battle is fully engaged right now, I would say. The Ukrainians apparently have thrown in reserves, and we'll see where this goes, but the battle is engaged, and it may be reaching the point where he's getting messages, hey, 50 days isn't soon enough for us, and we need some help now. So that may be partly also what's in play there. Of course, our various commentators on the dissident school, such as they're all of the opinion that this won't affect the Russians that much anyhow, and I'm sort of inclined to think so too. After all, I mean, look where the Japanese were in World War II, and it didn't stop them from fighting, did it? And look at the Germans, for example. I mean, they didn't have much trade, and so of course the oil was a big problem for them, whereas Russia has plenty of fuel. That's not their issue. But the thing that we've mentioned before is, of course, the Chinese kind of do have an interest. I think that if they do ever decide to make a move on Taiwan, they really would like to have the Russians backing them up rather than opposing them. And certainly that is one thing that I think that would be a factor in their thinking. And we'll see what happens. If the Chinese stand their ground and take the 100% tariffs and don't quit, they could then again cut off the rare earth minerals to the U.S. again, and that gets into a question of exactly how things will go. The other issue comes down to the BRICS. I mean, if BRICS has any credibility at all, they would obviously need to stand firm in this whole thing, or else they really aren't much of a front at all, right? I mean, if you just say I'm putting a tariff on you, and next thing you know, you cave and do whatever they tell you to do. So we'll have to see how that all pans out and what effect it is. However, after I've seen now that the Russians are continuing to expand their drone production, and that's advancing pretty heavily too. So the level of drone attacks have been over recent months or so have been increasing. So it looks to me like that we probably have an ongoing problem for the Ukrainians and how that's going to play out. The other problem with this whole thing, of course, is the fact that it looks like that, just listening to President Trump, I don't think he really understands the Russian mindset on this. And that explains a lot in the sense that he's almost running the U.S. government like it's a business in some ways. I mean, his whole focus seems to be to run a profit. And he apparently is running one with the tariffs and all. He's bringing in a lot of money. I mean, this EU thing could easily bring in, what, $300 billion a year or something like that. 15% of what, 2 trillion I've heard. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but if you look at the overall thing, I think that something in the range of 600 billion a year from all these tariffs is really possible if it continues, if trade doesn't subside. On the other hand, what one has to ask ourselves is how, I mean, obviously wealthy people that want to buy a Porsche probably will still buy a Porsche. It won't stop the Hollywood set and the billionaires and the million. It won't, they have the money. It's a luxury anyhow. And if they have to pay 15% more, they'll pay it. But how will it affect the lower end cars? I mean, now the whole other issue, of course, is the idea, of course, to bring more factories. These countries are probably agreeing to build more factories in the United States. Again, are we talking that parts or just the final assembly again? I mean, that's another thing that you have to kind of look at in all this is a lot of the key parts of these cars, the engines and the transmissions, differentials, a lot of these things are made all over the world, and then maybe the car is assembled here. But that doesn't mean that a lot of the money really is somewhere else too. So that's another thing. I'm also wondering, with all the different things that we're looking at, I'm still wondering, at a 4.1%, I think it is, unemployment rate, do we really have that much excess labor to really staff this all up? Or is AI and robotics going to save the day for us? That's, the other thing we have to kind of look at in all this subject. So I don't know. Well, anyhow, it's like that's kind of about it. We'll see whatever happens. Yes, but if nothing else, Trump really is the tariff sheriff, and he's laying down the law on a global basis. I'm almost kind of referring to this as kind of the global shakedown. I mean, because if you recall, I mean, the real reason why the situation was the way it was pre-Trump was during the Cold War, we were trying to keep these countries from going communist back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and all that. And the idea to keep them on board, we kind of agreed to do things. Remember, the countries were in shambles after World War II, too. So there was an effort to get them to rebuild and become a viable economy so that radical leftist movements wouldn't be that popular. And of course, they've gone past that now, so that's not an issue anymore. So now I guess we're kind of like taking it all back a little bit. And we'll see how that goes. I'm still wondering, I mean, how this Chinese thing will go, because we also get a lot of medicine, or at least the precursors that are necessary for medicines, and also the ones for fentanyl too, from China. Of course, we don't get that legally, but that's one of our big complaints is that stuff is coming in, and they know that there's a lot of things going between Russia and China too, in terms of probably chips and stuff like that. So that's another pressure point that we're going to see in these negotiations, and we don't know how quickly they'll wrap up. There's some rumors, which may be false, that they're going to just extend it for another period of time, although maybe not. I mean, that's I know that the spokesman for Trump there was kind of non-committal on that. So at any rate, I'll be wrapping this one up for now. We'll just have to see what happens next in the ongoing development. I know that the Democrats are still pushing back on the whole thing that Tulsi Gabbard has got going. And I'm sticking I think something still is going to happen on that. We just don't know when or how. And but I don't think convictions are necessarily the real measure of success. It's just the degree to which you can actually tie these people up. And maybe, I still think that perjury is likely to be the biggest charge. They might have a conspiracy charge, I don't know. But I think that they're more likely to have committed or commit perjury, and that's the one where they're probably more vulnerable. So this be it for this time. I'll be, of course, posting this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. So all for this time.